Russia. History of Russia. Now, as you said, their past, their behaviors, and what has been going on, very the popular thing going on with Russia right now. So, what is their history? What is their actual core behavior? That's what we would like to know.
Right, Russia is a fascinating country. It's a nation with which we have had a lot of a very strong and significant relationship since 1947, especially India-Russia ties. We always speak about that. So, and Russia is very important nowadays because of what's happening in the Ukraine region, the Ukraine conflict. So we have to understand, people would like to know why this is happening and what are the causes. And to understand the causes, we have to understand the history of Russia itself. So let's go back in time. I typically go back 1,000 years. This time I'll go back 2,000 years. So the people of Russia, there is a certain ethnicity called the Slavic people. Okay, the Slavic people. The Russians are the main Slavic group. It's a group of languages and it's a certain culture. So the Russians are Slavic people, the Ukrainians are Slavic people, the Serbians, Croats, Bosnians, Czechoslovakians, Poles, Slovenians, all these peoples are the Slavic peoples. They are the same overall ethnicity and they speak a group of languages which are overall called the Slavic languages. Like we have a bunch of languages in India which everybody can understand more or less. Similarly, Slavic languages are also more or less mutually intelligible. So the history of the Slavic people goes back at least about 2,000 years. In Roman chronicles, there is a mention of what seems to be a Slavic tribe or ethnicity. So it seems to go back about 2,000 years. Then the Slavic people, they typically lived around northern and eastern Europe, northeast Europe. I'm talking about the boundary of Europe and Asia, the imaginary boundary. Around that place they always have lived. Around 900 AD, you had something called the Confederation of the Rus people. So the Rus people were a group of Slavic tribes who happened to be ruled by a group of Vikings called the Kievan Rus. So these Vikings were actually Scandinavian people. They were the leadership of the Slavic people, and they were called the Rus. That's why this Slavic group came to be known as the Rus. Their capital was Kiev. They were called the Kievan Rus. Their major ruler was, his name was Grand Prince Vladimir. The Ukrainians call him Volodymyr, the Russians call him Vladimir. He was the Grand Prince Vladimir and he was the Rus leader of the Kievan Rus. The original capital of the Rus people is Kiev. Okay? Today it's the capital of Ukraine, but it's the original capital of the Rus people. Then the Kievan Rus became a very prosperous community. They had these trade networks. This is in the 10th, 11th, 12th century AD. About 800, 900 years before today. They had a big trade network. They used to trade with various parts of Europe and with the Byzantine Empire, all that. Byzantine Empire is in Istanbul, Constantinople, that region. Yeah. So the Slavs and the Rus were doing very well. Then in the 13th century, you had a terrible event, which was the Mongol invasion. The sudden rise of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan's descendants went on to conquer Russia. And until the late 14th, 15th century, the Rus were ruled by the Mongols. It was a very tough time for the Rus people. They call it the Mongol yoke. They were under the Mongol yoke. And the Mongols instituted lots of reforms and changes in the administrative structure. It became more militarized. It became more formalized. There were some progressive changes also. You can say, let's not go into that. But yeah, it was a period of Mongol rule for about 2 to 3 centuries. Then, with the decline of the Mongol Empire in the late 14th, 15th century, around that time, there was a resurgence in the rule of the Slavic people. And it all came with Ivan III, who defeated the Mongols and re-established sovereignty and independence of the Rus nation or republic. The capital was now changed to Moscow from Kiev. Okay, so it now shifted to Moscow. Then Ivan III's grandson, who was named Ivan the Terrible, he created a massive empire. Okay, so this was a massive empire. This is the first time the Russians become a major global or geopolitical power. They become a major North European power. Europeans always saw the Russians as outsiders, as Easterners. not white but Asiatic people, because they had mixed ethnicity by this time with the Mongols and all that, mixed blood and all that. So you have the beginning of the Russian Empire under Ivan III, then Ivan the Terrible. At this time, this region in the south of Russia, adjoining the Black Sea region, the Russians gave it the name of the borderlands. And the word for borderlands in Russian is Ukraina. Ukraina. So they called that region as the buffer zone between the Russian Empire and the various European nations. It was called the borderlands. It was a Russian region, Ukraina. All right? That's where Ukraine begins. And Ukraine is definitely 100% Slavic. It is definitely a descendant of the Kievan Rus of 1000 years ago. That's Ukraine. So you have Ivan the Terrible, who established a great and very brutal empire. Then you have Peter the Great in the 17th century, I think. Then you had Catherine the Great in the 18th century. These people, they tried to transform the Russian society into something that was more Eurocentric, more westernized, more modern in their opinion, because Russians were kind of primitive and more Asian in character until that time. So that is under Peter the Great, who transformed Russia into a major maritime nation. And then there was the expansion of Russia into the east. Today, if you see the map of Russia, where's the map? Where's the map? Okay, here we are. So today, if we see the map, we see this enormous nation called Russia. It stretches from Europe all the way into the far east of Asia. During the time of Peter the Great, Russia was still very much concentrated around Moscow, and it was more or less in the European region. Then Russians started expanding eastwards because of a simple reason, the fur trade. This entire Siberian region and North Asia region is extremely abundant in all these furry animals like ermines and minks and seals also and all that. And the fur trade was very lucrative, and nobody else in Europe was willing to go into those harsh, cold environments. So the Russians started expanding eastwards, and eventually by the late 19th century, they had conquered all of northern Eurasia, and they had even taken over Alaska. So Alaska was a Russian possession until the mid-19th century. Okay? So that's how Russia became so big. It was all a process of conquest by force. It was not voluntary. There are lots of people who live in this region, the vast region of northern Asia, who are essentially Turkic peoples and Mongolic peoples, Tuvan peoples, Aleutian peoples. They are not Russians. But today their primary language is Russian because of the process of Russification. The Russians imposed their language and culture on these people. That's what happened. So by the late 19th century, by the mid-19th century, by the 1850s, Russia is this enormous expanse of territory. And at that time, in the Crimea region, it was the Cossacks who were mostly living there. The Cossacks were a semi-nomadic tribe who were Russified by the Russians. And this region, once again, was just called Ukraina, the borderlands of Russia. And then what happened is that we had the expansion of the British Empire. We know the British conquered India, and they were also fighting for influence in Central Asia. And this came to a head in the Crimean War in the 1850s, which the British won. And the Russian Empire was then in a state of crisis. As a result of that, they had to sell off Alaska to the Americans. So Alaska is now a part of America. The Russians sold it for a very small amount. They thought there is nothing there. Today there are enormous reserves of coal and gas and gold in Alaska. The Russians did not know it. So that is what happened.